This is the NBC Sunday Night News, brought to you by Exxon.
Tonight, April 6th, reported by Tom Snyder from the NBC News Center in New York.
Good evening. At San Francisco, doctors said today that 31 of the South Vietnamese orphans flown in last night are nearly dead tonight, suffering from shock and dehydration. The 47 babies are being treated at hospitals by teams of volunteer doctors. Some have chicken pox. Some are survivors of Friday's plane crash that nearly killed 200 people. Several planes came in last night. Several more are arriving today. President Ford was in San Francisco last night to greet one of them and to welcome more than 300 new residents of the United States. And Fred Briggs was at the airport for the arrival ceremonies there.
The Pan Am 747 jet was chartered by Connecticut textile executive Robert Macaulay. He paid for the jet, and more than 300 Vietnamese orphans were brought into San Francisco, including nearly 100 who survived last week's C-5 crash near Saigon. That, plus the fact that this was the largest airlift to date, brought President and Mrs. Ford here to meet the plane. The children who had been injured in the C-5 disaster were the first to be evacuated from the plane. Ambulances took them to Letterman Army Hospital in the city. Then the president himself boarded the plane. He brought 2 orphans off the plane and carried them to buses. And like earlier airlifts, the children in these buses were taken to the Army's Presidio in San Francisco for processing. Later, they will be transported to the people around the country who have adopted them. Fred Briggs, NBC News, San Francisco.
Nearly all of the orphans now arriving in this country have already been adopted. The children arriving on the West Coast are traveling from there to all parts of the United States. Of those who arrived at Seattle last night, 56 were on the way to New York City, and 76 other children were heading for Chicago. And Bob Jameson has that part of the rescue story.
The 747 that landed in Seattle carried 409 orphans placed for adoption by the Holt Agency, the largest movement of children from Vietnam since the airlift began.
Congratulations, Father.
Most parents had waited at the airport 6 anxious hours to see their new children and to end their fears they might never arrive with a touch and a kiss.
Would you please take me to the back of the cabin and give...
But for nearly half the youngsters, the trip was not over. They were loaded aboard another Pan American jet donated by the airline for a flight to meet parents in Chicago and New York. In all, 159 orphans and 69 adult escorts made the trip from Seattle to Chicago. And it hardly seemed like a journey for children from war to new homes in a strange land. The orphans settled into the airline seats like experienced travelers. Well-behaved and unafraid of their surroundings and the strangers who were accompanying them. The jet's first-class galley held diapers and formula, not steaks and martinis, and airline meals, unfamiliar to the young Vietnamese. An easy adjustment for orphans who must now overcome jet lag, language barriers, and the emotional upheaval that comes with leaving an orphanage or a foster home for a new country, a new family. Yet these orphans were not unlike any other child their age. What's your name?
My name is Lim.
Lee? How old are you, Lee?
I am 9. 7 tuổi.
And how old are you? And as the plane neared Chicago, a peace of sorts settled over the youngsters for the first time. Peace for 7-month-old Lee Van Min, who today began a new life in the Midwest as the adopted son of Mr. and Mrs. John Gillis of Appleton, Wisconsin. Bob Jameson, NBC News, Chicago.
Graham Martin, the American ambassador to South Vietnam, was quoted by opposition politicians in Saigon today as saying the evacuation of orphans will help shift American public opinion in favor of the South Vietnamese. But the American embassy answered that by saying that Martin's overriding concern is the welfare of the children.